Hey everyone. Thanks so much for having us, and thank you to NetGuru for organizing this. I'm Mary Lague. I'm a partner and head of insights at Pilot 44. If you were on the previous session, you heard from our founder, Andrew. So just a really quick introduction on us. We're a corporate innovation studio that works with some of the world's biggest brands, essentially to help them innovate faster. From my perspective on the research side, that typically means looking to the startup and technology ecosystem as our way to sense disruption and also helping our clients not only understand where disruption is happening, but what they should do about it. So this typically involves us connecting our corporate partners with startups to do partnerships, pilots, ventures, you name it. So we began our first foray into the digital health and digital therapeutic space about 5 years ago. We were working with one of the bigger pharma companies that really wanted to reinvent the experience for patients with multiple sclerosis. As part of that journey, we really helped that client navigate the landscape, introduce them to about 20 or so different companies that could help them create better solutions for their patients. And that's how we got introduced to Twill Health. Back then, they were known as Happify. They were really focused on helping patients manage their mental wellness and happiness, and kind of deal with the mental health burden that comes across when you get something like a diagnosis for MS. So since then, we've gone on to work with a number of consumer healthcare and pharma clients, helping them navigate spaces like digital therapeutics, home diagnostics, value-based contracts, a number of other areas that are probably top of mind for a lot of the folks on the phone today. So I'm very excited to be here with Chris Wasden from Twill Health. We're going to talk today about how the world of digital therapeutics has changed, and kind of the experience going back to our first partnership about 5 years ago, how the space is evolving and what a successful partnership looks like between companies like Twill and the big pharma ecosystem. So with that, I'll hand it off to Chris. Thanks so much for being here. Please go ahead and just give a quick intro to yourself. And for those of us that don't know about Twill, what are you guys working on, and what are you working on in the digital therapeutic space?
Sure. So I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Twill. I've been with Twill for about 7 years now. I started with Twill initially to start the pharma business for them, and then ended up applying a lot of what we learned in pharma to other market segments we focus on, such as employers, health plans. We provide our products and services, for example, to large global employers like Amazon, Microsoft, Google on a global basis in 10 different languages in dozens of countries to help address the mental health issues of their employees. We do something similar with regards to health plans like Cigna. We work with Elevance as well to provide our digital products to their members. And then we've worked with about a dozen pharma companies over the last 5 years to help patients that have comorbid mental health issues within diseases. And through that, we've worked in areas such as rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis, atopic dermatitis, different forms of cancer, diabetes, as well as some other, comorbid physical health conditions that have mental health comorbidities. So that's where we've been on our journey, and I can take you through when you're ready, kind of what we've seen happen over the last 5 years, because the pharma industry has radically transformed with regards to their interest in digital therapies and digital health. And you may have seen the announcement yesterday that Biogen just got rid of 150 people in the organization that focused on digital health. So you continue to see this churn and turmoil in pharma as they try to find where they're trying to go in the digital space.
Great. Yeah, that's actually a great segue. I'm really curious, since you've been on this journey for a long time, and I know even since we started working in this space 5 years ago, the landscape has changed dramatically. Not only from the kind of startup and provider side. I think back 5 years ago there was only a handful of companies playing in this space. Now there's dozens, if not hundreds. And then also the pharma side is approaching it from a different direction as well. Would love to hear some of the big shifts you've seen, both from kind of the use cases being supported by digital therapeutics and also some of the ways that pharma companies are trying to tackle this.
Yeah. When we first started on our journey, there was a lot of hype around prescription digital therapeutics, and nearly every pharma discussion we had was around what are referred to as PDTs. And the point of view at that time was that PDTs were going to be the next type of innovation that's similar to gene therapy or biotech, and is going to be a new source of revenue for pharma companies and will be prescribed by physicians, paid by payers, sold by their sales force. And so they could naturally just slot it in like they did biotech following small molecules, like they're doing with gene therapy following biotech. So that was the premise, the thesis that everyone was focused on. The problem with that is that as the pharma companies started doing some very simple math, they realized that their many multi-billion-dollar franchises had very few patients. So, for example, we worked with one pharma company in MS that had a $2 billion MS drug franchise, but that was based upon about 25,000 patients because the drugs are so expensive. And so when they started doing the math, they said, okay, so if we can get 20% of all of our MS patients to use a digital therapeutic, and we can charge a little bit more than Pear was charging at the time, which is around $1,500 for a course of therapy, digital therapy, what is the amount of revenue that we can generate on these patients in this $2 billion business? And the incremental revenue that they calculated was somewhere around $5 or $6 million. And they said, you know, the juice isn't worth the squeeze, right? Why would we spend 3 to 5 years, millions of dollars of development, regulatory approval, negotiating with payers, training our sales force in order to generate an incremental $4 or $5 million? That just doesn't make sense. And so you started to see the pharma industry pivot away from this PDT business model. And today, with the exception of really 2 or 3 pharma companies, in fact, one of them just canceled a PDT project they had yesterday, there's really hardly any PDT areas of focus among pharma companies today. And at the time that this transition away from PDTs was happening, we approached a pharma company in rheumatoid arthritis, second largest company in that space. And they were talking to Pear at the time about doing a PDT. And all the pharma companies were second guessing this whole PDT approach. And so we approached them and said, look, PDTs don't make sense for a pharma company. There's not enough revenue there. It's too complicated. But a non-prescription digital therapeutic could make a lot of sense for you, because you could use a non-prescription digital therapeutic as a play to increase medication adherence, compliance, persistence. It could even make your offering more attractive, which could result in new scripts for the product. And so that's what you need to focus on, is how much more money can you make on the drug by using digital. And a non-prescription digital therapeutic, from a regulatory perspective, is not the highest level, but it is still an FDA-regulated product. And so there was a time where pharma companies wanted to focus on the highest level of regulatory compliance with digital, because they said, well, that's more comparable to what we do in drugs, right? We have to be FDA approved. A digital therapeutic would have to be FDA cleared. It requires a lot of evidence. We do a lot of evidence. Now, as you move from a PDT down to an NPDT, the amount of evidence required can be lessened. There is no approval or clearance required. And so what you get with all of that is you get speed, right? It's not going to take you 3 to 5 years. For example, Click Therapeutics has been working with Otsuka for 5 years on a PDT for major depressive disorder, and they still don't have a product in market. And they've spent gazillions of dollars on that. So this pharma company canceled their discussions with Pear at the time, said that they would work with us. And so we then moved forward, and within 6 months, we had a prescription or a non-prescription digital therapeutic product that was ready for testing with rheumatoid arthritis patients to address the symptoms of stress, anxiety, depression, and pain and fatigue. And those were the endpoints that we were going to be measuring in a study with hundreds of patients. So we began that study. We got the clinical outcomes so that we could actually make clinical and statistically significant claims around anxiety, depression, pain, and fatigue. And we got ready to bring that product to market. And when it went up for review with the legal, medical, and regulatory people at that company, they said, we do not support you in using these claims with that product. And the client, which was for us was the commercial part of the organization, said, but wait, we've got this study. We've got almost 400 people. They use the product for several months. They got these clinical claims using clinical instruments. We have these P scores. And the legal, medical, and regulatory people said, we don't care. You're dealing with a $5 billion drug business with this one drug. We don't want the FDA regulatory scrutiny applied to this drug in a digital sense. We don't want to take any digital regulatory risk at all because it could have a negative impact on a $5 billion business we have. And so with that, we then had to pivot because they didn't want a non-prescription digital therapeutic that was regulated under FDA enforcement discretion. They didn't want all this evidence to support it with strong clinical claims. So that we said, okay, well, we will then take away those claims, and the only claim that we will make is that it improves your well-being as a rheumatoid arthritis patient. Okay, and that's all that their organization was comfortable in doing despite the evidence. And so this gets into this issue where everyone claims, well, if you have the evidence, you can say whatever you want. No, because organizations have a risk associated with claims. And even when they have the evidence, they may not want to take the risk. And so with that partner, we then ended up having the product get reclassified as a well-being product, which is not regulated by the FDA. And then they began to offer it to their patients, which then brings in this next challenge, which is that most pharma companies have no idea who most of their patients are, right? Because the physician prescribes the product, and the pharma companies don't know who's getting the product. They don't have a relationship with the patient. And so, on average, less than 10% of patients have ever participated in a patient support program. And so the pharma company doesn't know who 90% of their patients are. And so if that's true for most drugs, and it is, then how does a patient actually get access to a digital product that a pharma company is willing to pay for that's going to increase the quality of life and the well-being of a patient? Well, it's tough, right? So they don't have a lot of patients. They don't have a lot of experience activating patients on digital products. And so then there's an issue of, well, we're having a tough time getting this into the hands of a lot of patients because we don't know a lot of patients. So then they come back to us and say, can you help us? You did this trial, this study with us where you found 7,000 patients with rheumatoid arthritis in the matter of 2 months, and you got about 700 of those to use your product, and those were patients on our drug. Can you help us find our patients? Okay, that becomes part of the value proposition. Can you find and activate our patients so they can actually use the product that we're willing to pay for that you made for us? And so then as that evolved, the company's patent was approaching expiration within a couple of years. And so the leadership of the company said, you know what? We don't care about medication adherence on drugs that are almost at their patent cliff. It's just not a priority for us. We're not going to spend on it. We're just going to let it continue to coast. And we're going to take all the money that we spend on sales and marketing and supporting this drug, and we're going to refocus it on drugs that are earlier stage in the pipeline. And we found this to be actually a pattern among many pharma companies, that initially they thought digital was going to be a solution to help them maybe extend the patent expiration deadlines, to increase medication adherence in drugs that might be waning in market impact because they're older and they're now competing against newer drugs. But we found almost universally that the pharma companies are saying, we only want to use digital in the early stage of a life cycle of a drug to help with the market launch, to help with early adoption, to help with our positioning with regards to medication adherence. And so that's now where we see the majority of the pharma companies thinking about digital, and all of the value of digital is about getting more prescriptions. And that shouldn't be a surprise because pharma companies only have one business model. It's selling drugs. So if that is their business model, then of course they're going to use digital to support that business model. And so all digital companies really need to look at how do we help get new patients on drug therapy with our digital products? How do we improve the management of symptoms of patients on a drug therapy? How do we improve medication adherence, persistence, compliance of a drug therapy? Because the revenue generating rationale for using digital is going to be around the drug, not as a new revenue stream for the digital.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. That was a super interesting case study that I think highlights a lot of really interesting things, particularly around the value that partnering externally can help in this space, because it enables you to move faster, enables you to pivot when you realize things aren't working. So I know we only have about a minute left, but I did have one or two quick questions I would love to get your perspective on.
Sure.
The first one is just around the build versus buy dilemma.
Mhm.
For the pharma companies on the phone right now, what would you recommend in terms of if they do want to partner, how do you find the right partner in this space? And when do you decide to build something internally?
Yeah, I just published an article on LinkedIn yesterday on this exact topic, and the misperception nearly all pharma companies make is that providing a digital therapy or a digital experience to patients is a software problem, and it's not a software problem.
Mhm.
It's an activation problem, it's an engagement problem, it's a behavior change problem. And so we see so many pharma companies thinking, well, I'll hire a dev shop, or I'll hire my ad agency, or I'll buy a tool that allows me to develop software, and I'll do it from scratch, and I'll come up with my own branding and positioning and my own level of activities and everything, and I'll give it to a patient. The problem with software is it's not like a drug where it has one form factor, right? So whether it's an injection or a pill, the user experience is very limited in so many different dimensions. Whereas when you deal with software, it's all about the user experience. And the user experience is so varied. And so what you find is that over 94% of pharma efforts to make digital with a partner that's a dev shop or an ad agency, or they buy tools, ends in failure. And it's because it takes tens of thousands of patients using a digital product over several years for you to optimize it and understand how you actually create a product that patients will download, that patients will use, they'll come back and use it again and again, and it delivers behavior change that delivers an ROI. And so what pharma companies are guaranteeing is that if they try to build it themselves, if they try to buy it from having some dev shop do it for them, they're going to have failure. That is the formula for failure. We know 94% of these things fail. We've had pharma companies approach us and say, hey, we made this great app. Do you guys want to buy it? No, we don't, okay, because it doesn't work. And so the only model that really works is to find a partner that already has software that they know works, that they have data on activation, they have data on engagement, they have data on clinical outcomes, they have data on behavior change, they have data on ROI. And if you don't have that data from a partner, you shouldn't work with them because you're not going to have success.
Awesome. Great. Thanks so much, Chris. Final question. If you had a magic wand, what's one thing that you would change about the industry or that you wish that was different to enable this to scale more quickly?
Yeah. There's actually one thing that would transform this industry. If the payers that pay for these drug products were to tell a pharma company that I am not going to pay for your drug unless you give me 3 data items. The first is you have to show me the patient took the drug, because half of all drugs are not taken, right? So they're sitting on our shelves. We all have them on our shelves, right, that have been there for years that we never took, but they were paid for, okay? The second is you got to provide me data that show that improved clinical outcomes. We also know that half of all drugs that are taken are not delivering good outcomes for the patients. And the third thing is you have to show me data that the quality of the patient's life improved as a result of taking that drug. And if payers required pharma companies to give them those 3 pieces of data for patients that use their drugs, it would transform the digital health industry, because the only way to gather that data is through digital means. And so it would require every pharma company to have a digital companion for every one of their drugs to gather the data necessary to get paid.
Right. Awesome. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, but thanks so much, Chris. This was super insightful. I wish we had more time, but thanks again for joining, and thanks everyone else on the call.
Sure.